In a city that never slows down, a 7-year-old girl with a guitar bigger than she is fights to save her sick mother. She sings on the streets, unaware that her voice filled with emotion could change her family's destiny. When an unexpected opportunity comes along, she doesn't hesitate and signs up for a talent show that could change her life forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The morning awoke slowly in the city of New York. The sky still held that typical grey hue of a metropolis, where the concrete seemed to suck away any trace of color. The streets of Midtown were already beginning to fill with hurried people, each person wrapped up in their own thoughts, their appointments, their urgencies. No one looked to the side, no one stopped. The city didn't forgive those who hesitated, but on that corner of 42nd Street near the subway station, something different caught the attention of those passing by. A small girl with brown hair tied in 2 messy pigtails was sitting on a cardboard box. Beside her, carefully propped against the wall, was a worn-out guitar that seemed to have lived many stories before reaching her hands. The instrument was almost her size, disproportionate, but she held it with a familiarity that defied her young age. Her name was Lucy. She was only 7 years old, but her brown eyes held a depth that didn't match her childhood. They weren't the eyes of someone who played in the street or chased after kites. They were the eyes of someone who already knew the harshness of the world, of someone who had learned too early what responsibility meant. She wore a faded pink blouse and a pair of jeans patched at the knees. On her feet, a pair of white sneakers that were once new, but now carried the marks of time and constant use. Before her, on the ground dirty with dust and scraps of paper, an old cap rested, upside down. Inside it, a few coins jingled softly whenever someone passed by, and moved by an impulse of compassion or curiosity, dropped a contribution in. Lucy adjusted the guitar on her lap, took a deep breath, and began to play. Her small fingers slid across the strings with surprising dexterity. The tuning wasn't perfect. Some notes came out more strained than they should, but there was something in the way she played that touched the soul of anyone who listened. It was sincerity, it was total surrender. There was no artifice, no pretense, just a child and her music. And then she began to sing. Lucy's voice was high and delicate, but it carried an unexpected strength. Each word came out charged with emotion. Each note seemed to be torn from a deep place within her. The song was simple, repetitive, but moving. It was a melody that spoke of sun, of light, of unconditional love. A song that to those rushing by might have seemed like just another children's tune. But for Lucy, that song was everything. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are grey. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The lyrics echoed through the busy corner, competing with the noise of cars, horns, and hurried conversations. Some people stopped for a few seconds, looked at the girl with a mixture of pity and admiration, and went on their way. Others didn't even notice her presence, lost in their headphones and their own worries. But there were those who truly stopped, those who approached, placed a coin in the cap, and stood there, even for a brief moment, listening to that small voice that carried the weight of a story they would never know. Lucy sang every day on that same corner. She arrived early, around 8 in the morning, and stayed there until the early afternoon. Then she would gather her things, carefully put the guitar inside a torn fabric case, collect the coins from the cap, and run back home. For her, this wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. It was her way of fighting. On that Thursday morning, the foot traffic was heavier than usual. People came and went without stopping. Lucy kept singing, repeating the same song, always the same song. She didn't know any others. She didn't need to. That song was enough. It was the song her mother used to sing to her when she was still a baby, in times when everything seemed simpler, safer. It was the song that lulled her on difficult nights, that calmed her when she was afraid. It was the most precious memory Lucy held of a time when life hadn't yet become this constant struggle. Her mother's name was Helen, a woman of 32, with long dark hair and tired eyes that were still full of sweetness. Helen had been young, beautiful, and full of dreams. She had worked as a seamstress, a shop assistant, a cleaner. She did whatever it took to ensure Lucy had food on the table and a roof over her head. The two lived alone in a small rented room on the outskirts of the South Bronx. The room was small, damp, with peeling walls and a window that didn't close properly. But it was their home. It was where they hugged on bad days, where they shared their daily bread, where Helen taught Lucy to read, to write, to dream. But in recent months, everything had changed. Helen had started to feel sharp pains in her abdomen. At first, she ignored them. She took cheap painkillers bought at the corner pharmacy and kept working, but the pains worsened. Then came the dizziness, the weakness, the fainting spells. A neighbor found her collapsed on the bathroom floor one morning and called an ambulance. At the public hospital, after hours of waiting and basic tests, the doctors gave the diagnosis Helen had feared, a serious problem that required immediate treatment. The words were technical, complicated, but the meaning was clear. She was very sick. She needed surgery, expensive medications, and constant medical supervision. Helen cried when she received the news, not for herself but for Lucy. Who would take care of the girl if she couldn't recover? Who would feed her, protect her, love her? Lucy was all Helen had in the world. She was her reason for living, her greatest treasure, the living proof that love can be pure and true even when everything around is crumbling. The treatment at the public hospital was slow, bureaucratic, insufficient. The doctors did what they could with the resources they had, but everyone knew it wasn't enough. Helen needed something more. She needed private treatment, specialized doctors, medications that the public system didn't offer. And all of that cost money. A lot of money. Money they didn't have. That's when Lucy made her decision. Helen was lying in the bed of their small room, weak and pale, when the girl approached with the guitar in her hands. It was an instrument that had belonged to Helen herself, who used to play at neighborhood block parties before she got sick. Lucy had taken it from the corner of the room where it was leaning, covered in dust, and said with a determination that sent a shiver down her mother's spine, "Mum, I'm going to sing on the street. I'm going to raise money to make you better." Helen wanted to protest, to say it was impossible, that a 7-year-old child shouldn't carry such a burden. But when she looked into her daughter's eyes, she saw something that left her speechless. She saw courage. She saw love. She saw a girl who was willing to do anything to save the person she loved most in the world. And so it began. Lucy taught herself the basic chords of the song her mother sang to her. It wasn't easy. Her fingers were too small, the strings hurt, the sounds came out wrong. But she didn't give up. She practiced day and night until she could finally play it reasonably well. And then she went out to the streets. At first, it was humiliating. People passed by and laughed at her. Some made cruel comments, others ignored her completely. There were days she came home with the cap almost empty, her hands sore and her eyes full of tears. But Helen would welcome her with a tight hug and say, "You're my hero, Lucy, never forget that." And those words gave the girl the strength to go back the next day. As the weeks went by, Lucy gained confidence. Her voice grew stronger, her presence on the corner became known. Some people started to stop and truly listen. A man in a suit who passed by every day on his way to work always left a few coins and would say, "You have a special talent, kid. Don't give up." A woman who sold candy on the subway would sometimes sit next to Lucy and sing along just to keep her company. And there were those who simply stopped, listened in silence and walked away with teary eyes, touched by something they couldn't explain. But the money Lucy collected wasn't enough. Not even close. With each passing day, Helen grew weaker. Her face was paler, her body thinner. She tried to hide her suffering from her daughter, but Lucy saw everything. She saw how her mother shivered with fever during the night, how she could barely get out of bed, how she forced a smile whenever the girl came home. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult day when almost no one had stopped to listen, Lucy returned home carrying the guitar and the cap with only a few loose coins. Upon entering the small room, she found Helen passed out on the bathroom floor. The girl screamed, cried, called for help. The same neighbor from before came running and helped put Helen back in bed. They gave her sugar water, fanned the room, and waited for her to come to. When Helen opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was her daughter's frightened face. She reached out her hand, touched Lucy's face, and whispered in a weak voice, "Don't be scared, my little one. I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay." But Lucy knew it wasn't true. She knew that time was running out. She knew she needed a miracle. And it was on a rainy Friday afternoon, while she was singing on the drenched corner, shivering from the cold, that the miracle began to take shape. A middle-aged woman with a colorful umbrella and an elegant coat stopped in front of Lucy. She stood there for long minutes, listening to the girl sing under the fine rain that fell over New York. When Lucy finished the song, the woman approached, opened her purse, and placed a $50 bill in the cap. Lucy's eyes widened. It was the largest amount anyone had ever given her. "You sing beautifully, dear," the woman said with a kind smile. "What's your name?" "Lucy," the girl replied, still surprised. "Lucy, you have a rare talent. Have you ever thought about entering a contest?" The girl shook her head. She didn't know what the woman was talking about. The woman then opened her purse again and took out a folded flyer. "Look at this. It's a talent show that's going to be on television. They're holding open auditions for children and teenagers. The prize is $1 million. Lucy took the flyer with trembling hands. Her reading was still basic, but she managed to make out the main words: "Open auditions. America's Rising Stars. $1 million prize." Her heart raced. $1 million. It was more money than she could collect in 1,000 lifetimes singing on the streets. It was enough money to pay for all of her mother's treatments. It was salvation. "Do you think I can do it?" Lucy asked, her voice choked with emotion. The woman knelt down, getting to the girl's eye level, and said firmly, "I'm sure of it." And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of the grey city. Lucy looked at the rain-soaked flyer, carefully tucked it inside her guitar case, and ran home faster than ever. Her soaked sneakers splashed in the puddles, her clothes were stuck to her body from the cold, but she felt none of it. She only felt hope, a hope that hadn't visited her heart in a long time. When she arrived at the small room, she found Helen sitting on the edge of the bed trying to stand up. The girl ran, to her, hugged her tightly, and said out of breath, "Mom, I found a way. I'm going to be on a TV show and I'm going to win $1 million. I'm going to heal you, Mom. I'm going to do it." Helen looked at her daughter, saw the desperate gleam in her eyes, and didn't have the heart to say it was impossible. She didn't have the heart to destroy that hope. She just hugged Lucy with all the strength she had left and whispered, "I believe in you, my little one. I always have." In the days that followed, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about the show. During the day, she continued to go to the corner to sing, but now with renewed motivation. At night, at home, she studied the flyer, trying to understand what she needed to do to participate. Helen, though weak, helped as much as she could. She explained what she could about television, about contests, about performances. "You'll need to register, Lucy. Then they'll call you for the audition, and there, you'll sing in front of the judges. If they like you, you'll move on to the next round. And what if I don't? Make it, Mum." Helen held her daughter's face between her hands and said with all the conviction she still had, "You will make it, because you have something that no one else has. You have truth in your voice, and the truth always touches hearts." The registration was done over the phone, with the help of the neighbor who had a cell phone. Lucy gave her full name, her age, and explained that she sang and played the guitar. The operator on the other end of the line was kind and said she was registered, and that she would soon receive a call with the date and time of the audition. Lucy waited anxiously. Each passing day seemed longer than the last. Helen, meanwhile, continued to weaken. Her strength was fading bit by bit, as if life were slowly slipping from her body. But she held on. She held on for her daughter. She held on for that one last chance. And then, on a sunny Saturday morning, the neighbor's phone rang. It was the show's production team. Lucy's audition was scheduled for the following Friday at 10 in the morning at the Javits Center. When Lucy received the news, she screamed with joy. She jumped, she cried, she hugged her mother so tightly that Helen had to ask her to loosen her grip. But she was happy. Even with all the pain, even with all the weakness, she was happy to see that sparkle in her daughter's eyes. Now you need to practice a lot, Lucy. It's going to be the most important day of your life." And Lucy practiced. She practiced like never before. She would wake up before sunrise and stay there, in the cramped little room, playing and singing the same song over and over. Helen, lying in bed, would listen with her eyes closed, trying to commit every note, every word to memory. She knew this could be one of the last moments she would have with her daughter. On the Monday before the audition, something terrible happened. Helen fainted again, but this time it was different. She didn't wake up right away. She was unconscious for several minutes. When she finally came to, she was confused, disoriented. Lucy, terrified, wanted to call an ambulance, but Helen stopped her. "No, my child, I just need to rest a bit. I'll be fine until Friday. I promise." But Lucy saw the truth in her mother's eyes. She saw that she was getting worse. She saw that time was running out. That night, lying next to her mother in the narrow bed, Lucy made a silent promise. She promised herself that she would win that contest, that no matter what happened, she would give her all on stage. Not just for herself, but for Helen, for everything her mother had done, for all the love she had received, for all the strength that woman had given her. The days dragged on in torturous slowness. Lucy couldn't think of anything else. She stopped going to the corner to sing, preferring to stay home to take care of her mother and practice. Helen, despite everything, struggled to stay conscious, to support her daughter, to be present in those final moments before the big day. And then, finally, Friday arrived. Lucy woke up before dawn. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it wanted to burst out of her chest. She looked to her side and saw Helen still sleeping, her face pale as wax. For a moment she was afraid her mother wouldn't wake up, but then Helen slowly opened her eyes and smiled. "Good morning, my little one. The big day is here." Lucy got dressed in the best clothes she had, a white blouse that the neighbor had given her as a gift, and the same patched jeans. She brushed her hair, tying it into a simple ponytail. She put on her worn-out white sneakers. She picked up the guitar carefully, as if she were holding something sacred. Helen got up with difficulty, leaning against the wall. She put on a simple dress and tied up her hair. She was weak, feverish, but determined. She wouldn't miss this moment for anything in the world. The two left the small room and took the bus that would take them to the city centre. The journey was long, almost 2 hours. Helen sat the whole time, her head resting against the window pane, trying not to show how sick she felt. Lucy held her mother's hand tightly, as if that touch could keep her alive. When they finally arrived at the Javits Centre, Lucy was frozen. The building was enormous, imposing, surrounded by elegant people and expensive equipment. Television cameras were everywhere. Luxury cars were parked at the entrance. Contestants dressed in designer clothes, accompanied by well-dressed and confident parents. Lucy and Helen, with their simple clothes and worn-out guitar, seemed completely out of place there. But the girl took a deep breath, squeezed her mother's hand and said, "Come on, Mom, we can do this." And the two went inside. Inside the convention center, the hustle and bustle was even greater. There were huge lines, people shouting, producers running from one side to the other with clipboards, cameras filming everything. Lucy felt small, insignificant, lost in that sea of people and noise. But she kept going. After more than an hour of waiting in line, it was finally Lucy's turn. A production assistant, a young man with spiky hair and an earpiece, called her name. "Lucy Miller?" "Yes, that's me," she answered with a trembling voice. "Are you alone, or do you have a guardian?" "I have my mum." The young man looked at Helen, noticed her frail condition, and made a note on his clipboard. "All right, you can wait over there in the family room. Lucy will go into the audition alone." Helen wanted to protest, to say she needed to be with her daughter, but she didn't have the strength. She just hugged Lucy with all the intensity she had left and whispered in her ear, "You're going to be amazing, my little one. Sing from your heart. Sing like you've always sung for me." Lucy nodded, swallowed her tears, and followed the production assistant down a long, quiet corridor. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Her heart beat erratically. With every step, she felt the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just an audition, it was the chance to save the life of the person she loved most. Finally, they reached a huge door. On the other side, Lucy could hear muffled voices, music, applause. The assistant turned to her and said, "When this door opens, you're going to walk in and go to the center of the stage. There, you'll introduce yourself and say your name, your age, and what you're going to do. Then just wait for the judges to give you the signal to start. Got it?" Lucy nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood everything. The door opened, and Lucy walked in. The glare of the lights was overwhelming. Lucy took her first step onto the stage and had to squint, trying to adjust to the intense brightness that seemed to come from all sides. White, yellow, blue, red spotlights. Everything flashed, everything shone. Everything seemed to be there to intimidate her. Her knees were shaking. Her hands were cold and sweaty as she clutched the worn-out guitar. But she didn't stop. She kept walking step by step until she reached the center of the stage where an X was marked on the floor with colored tape. On the other side, at a distance that seemed miles away, sat the three judges behind a long, elegant table. Lucy couldn't see their faces clearly because of the lights, but she knew they were there watching her, judging her before she even opened her mouth. Around the stage, huge cameras were pointed at her, operated by serious men wearing headsets who seemed never to blink. Above, in the empty stands that would later be filled with an audience, only a few scattered producers and assistants watched the scene with clipboards and cell phones in hand. A heavy silence hung in the air. Lucy swallowed hard. Her heart was beating so loudly she was sure everyone there could hear it. "Hello, dear," said a female voice from the judges' table. It was soft, welcoming. "What's your name?" Lucy tried to answer, but her voice failed. She cleared her throat, took a deep breath, and tried again. "Lucy. Lucy Miller." "How old are you, Lucy?" "7. There was a murmur of surprise from the table. The judge speaking was Marcia Shaw, a famous singer from the 90s who now worked as a judge and mentor for new talent. She had short blonde hair, red-framed glasses, and a kind smile. "7 years old, you're very brave, you know that. What are you going to do for us today?" "I'm going to sing and play the guitar." "Great. And this song you're going to sing, does it have a name?" Lucy nodded. "You are my sunshine." Next to Marcia, sitting with a rigid posture and his arms crossed, was Frederick Lloyd, a respected conductor known for being extremely demanding with contestants. He had a graying beard, wore an impeccable black suit and glasses. He watched Lucy with a serious, almost disinterested expression. "Did you write this song?" Frederick asked in a deep, authoritative voice. "No, sir. It's a song my mom used to sing to me when I was a baby." "I see. And are you actually going to play that guitar, or is it just for decoration?" Lucy felt a tightness in her chest. The question sounded like a taunt, as if he were doubting her before even hearing her. But she lifted her chin, held the guitar tighter against her chest, and answered firmly, "I'm going to play for real." "Then let's see," Frederick said with a skeptical half-smile. The third judge, sitting on the other side of the table, had not yet spoken. He was slightly apart from the other two, his body leaning forward, elbows on the table, and his hands clasped under his chin. He wore a blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, black pants, and a luxury watch that gleamed under the lights. His hair was black with some grey at the temples, slicked back with gel. His face was angular, marked by an expression that shifted between weariness and irritation. His dark, deep eyes were fixed on Lucy with an intensity the girl couldn't decipher. This was Richard Sterling, businessman, music producer, owner of one of the largest record labels in the country. A man who had built an empire in the entertainment industry, who had discovered artists that now sold millions of records, who had enough power to change a life with a simple yes, or destroy it with a simple no. He was feared, respected, and envied. His presence on the show had been one of the production's biggest coups. He was a man who rarely appeared in public, who avoided the spotlight despite working with it every day. But at that moment, something inside Richard was uneasy. Ever since the girl had walked onto the stage, he had felt an inexplicable discomfort, a strange feeling in his chest, as if something was wrong, out of place. He couldn't take his eyes off her. That tiny face, that brown hair tied in a ponytail, those big, frightened eyes. There was something familiar there, but he couldn't place what it was. "You can start whenever you're ready, Lucy," Marcia said gently. Lucy adjusted the guitar on her lap, positioned her fingers on the strings. Her hands were still trembling, but she took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment and thought of her mother. She thought of Helen waiting in the family room, weak and sick, but rooting for her. She thought of all the cold mornings on the corner, all the coins collected one by one, all the times she almost gave up but kept going. She thought of the promise she had made to herself, to win this contest, to get the money to save her mother, and then she began to play. The first chords came out hesitant, a little out of tune. Frederick rolled his eyes discreetly. Marcia maintained her encouraging smile, but Richard leaned even further forward, frowning. There was something in those notes, something he knew. Lucy opened her mouth and began to sing. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her small, high-pitched voice echoed across the stage. It wasn't technically perfect. There were notes that wavered, breaths in the wrong places, a pitch that fluctuated. But there was truth. There was emotion. There was something so pure, so honest in that voice, that it was impossible not to feel it. "You make me happy when skies are grey." Richard froze. That song. That damn song. He knew it. He knew every word, every note, every pause. It echoed in his memory, like a long-buried ghost. His heart began to pound. His hands, previously clasped, were now clenched together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You'll never know, dear, how much I love you." The memories came flooding back. Richard saw himself 7 years younger, in a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of New York. He saw the woman he loved, Helen, a few months pregnant, singing that song while stroking her belly. She sang it every night, said she wanted the baby to recognize her voice when it was born. Richard remembered how he used to hug her from behind, how he would rest his face on her belly and feel the little kicks. He remembered promising that he would take care of them both, that he would never abandon them, that they would be a family. But he had lied. "Please don't take my sunshine away." Lucy's voice began to tremble, but she continued. Tears started to stream down her face, wetting the guitar. She wasn't crying because she was nervous or scared. She was crying because that song carried all her pain, all her desperation, all her love for her dying mother. Richard felt a lump form in his throat. His hands were shaking. His world was falling apart right there on that stage, in front of this girl he had never seen before, but somehow felt he knew. He started to put the pieces together. Her age, the song, the sick mother she had mentioned. No, it couldn't be. Lucy finished the song. The last chord echoed through the silent studio. She lowered her head, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and waited. Waited for the verdict that would decide her future. There was a silence that seemed to last an eternity. Marcia was the first to speak. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Lucy, dear, that was very special, very intense. You're only 7, but you sing as if you've lived 1,000 lifetimes. Where does that emotion come from?" Lucy lifted her face. Her cheeks were still wet. "I sing for my mum. She's very sick. I need to win this prize to pay for her treatment." Marcia put a hand to her chest, visibly moved. Frederick, the austere conductor, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat before speaking. "Your story is moving, no doubt, but I have to be honest with you. Technically, your performance had flaws. Your pitch isn't perfect, you lost the tempo in a few places, and your guitar is out of tune." Lucy felt her world collapse. The tears started to flow again. She was going to be eliminated. She wouldn't be able to save her mom. She had failed. But Frederick continued, "However, there is something in your voice that can't be taught. There is soul. There is truth. And that, my young lady, is rarer than technique. I vote yes for you." Lucy's eyes widened, barely believing what she was hearing. Marcia clapped her hands and exclaimed, "I vote yes too. You're a raw talent that needs polishing, but you have everything it takes to shine." 2 yes votes. Lucy needed just one more to pass. She looked at the third judge, the man in the blue shirt who still hadn't said a word. Richard was motionless, his face pale, his eyes fixed on her but as if he were looking through her to somewhere far away. "Richard," Marcia called. "What's your vote?" Richard didn't answer. He seemed to be in a trance. His breathing was fast, ragged. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to compose himself, trying to push away the memories that were suffocating him. But it was impossible. That girl, that song, it couldn't be a coincidence. "Richard," Marcia insisted, now worried. "Are you okay?" He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over behind him. The noise echoed through the studio. Everyone looked at him, startled. Richard ran a hand over his face, turned, and started walking toward the stage exit. I need a moment," he muttered in a hoarse voice. "Excuse me." And he left hastily, leaving behind a stunned silence. Lucy stood there, confused and frightened. Marcia and Frederick looked at each other, not knowing what to do. One of the producers ran onto the stage, said something quietly to the judges. There was a quick discussion. Finally, Marcia turned to Lucy and said with a forced smile, "Lucy, dear, you're through to the next round. Congratulations." The girl felt her legs go weak. She had done it. She had really done it. She thanked them with a trembling voice, picked up her guitar, and practically ran off the stage. She had to tell her mum. She needed to see Helen, to hug her, to share this joy with her. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the Javits Center, Richard Sterling was stumbling like a drunk. He leaned against the cold wall, trying to catch his breath. His heart was pounding out of control. His mind was in chaos. He couldn't bear to admit it, but he had to know. He had to be sure. He saw one of the production assistants passing with a clipboard and called him over with a sharp gesture. "You, come here." The young man approached, frightened by the judge's aggressive tone. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "That girl who just performed, Lucy Miller, I want all the information you have on her immediately." The assistant blinked, confused. "Sir, I don't know if I can—" "I'm not asking for permission," Richard exploded. "I want to know who she is, where she's from, who her parents are. Do you understand?" The young man nodded quickly, terrified. "Yes, sir, I'll check right away." And he ran off. Richard stood there, leaning against the wall, his hands shaking. He closed his eyes and went back in time. 7 years and a few months ago, he was just a budding music producer, working with small local artists, trying to make a name for himself in the industry. He met Helen at a local music club in the Bronx. She sang with a sweet, authentic voice that enchanted him immediately. They started talking, meeting up, falling in love. Helen was everything Richard was not. She was simple, honest, from humble roots. She worked as a seamstress during the day and sang at night for passion, not for money. He found himself drawn not just to her beauty, but to her purity, her authenticity. With Helen, Richard felt human again, far from the phoniness of the music industry. They lived together for almost a year of genuine happiness, of plans for the future, of shared dreams. And then Helen got pregnant. Richard vividly remembered the day she told him the news. They were in the small apartment where they lived, and Helen had prepared a special dinner. After they ate, she held his hands and said with shining eyes, "Richard, I'm having a baby. We're going to be parents." He should have been happy. He should have hugged Helen and celebrated. But instead, he felt panic. Panic about being tied down, about not being able to pursue his career, about being stuck in the Bronx forever. At that time, he was getting offers to work with major record labels in Manhattan, offers that meant more money, more status, more opportunities, but they also meant total dedication, drastic changes, sacrifices. He told Helen he was happy. He lied. He said he would take care of her and the baby. He lied again. Over the following months, as Helen's belly grew, Richard grew emotionally distant. He spent more and more time away from home, immersed in his work, avoiding confronting reality. And then, when Helen was in her 7th month of pregnancy, Richard made the most cowardly decision of his life. He accepted an offer to work at a major record label, but the condition was to move to another city for a while, to dedicate himself exclusively to work, with no distractions. He knew it meant abandoning Helen and the baby. He knew he was making a terrible mistake, but his ambition spoke louder. He left a letter. He didn't even have the courage to tell her in person. In the letter, he explained that he wasn't ready to be a father, that he needed to follow his career, that she and the baby would be better off without him. He left some money on the table and left. He never went back. He never called. He never tried to find out. He built his career, his empire, his fortune. He had superficial relationships that never lasted. He lived alone in a luxury apartment in the Upper West Side, surrounded by professional achievements and emotional emptiness. Occasionally, in moments of silence, he would remember Helen. He would wonder if she had given birth, if the baby was a boy or a girl, if they were okay. But he never had the courage to look for them. The guilt was too great. The weight of his abandonment was unbearable. And now, 7 years later, here was a 7-year-old girl with brown hair like Helen's, singing the song Helen used to sing, saying her mother was sick and needed help. It couldn't be a coincidence. The production assistant returned out of breath, holding some printed papers. "Mr. Sterling, I got the information." Richard snatched the papers from his hands and began to read quickly. Full name, Lucy Miller Santos. Date of birth, March 15th, 7 years ago. Mother's name, Helen Santos. Address, 123. Daisy Street, South Bronx, New York. Richard felt his legs give way. It was her, it was his daughter. That girl on the stage with her frightened eyes and her voice full of emotion was his biological daughter, the child he had abandoned before she was even born. And Helen, the woman he had loved and left, was sick, gravely ill. He leaned his back against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor. He covered his face with his hands, and for the first time in years, Richard Sterling cried. He cried for the cowardice of his past. He cried for the daughter he never knew. He cried for the woman he never went back to find. He cried for the chance to be a father that he had thrown away. He cried for all the pain he had caused. A producer passed by in the hallway and saw him there, sitting on the floor, crying. He wanted to ask if everything was okay, but Richard made a sharp gesture for him to be left alone, and the man moved on, leaving behind the billionaire tycoon who had just discovered that the biggest failure of his life wasn't professional but personal. It took almost half an hour for Richard to compose himself. He stood up, straightened his crumpled clothes, washed his face in a nearby restroom, and took a deep breath. He had to make a decision. He couldn't just go home and pretend nothing had happened, not after knowing the truth. He took out his cell phone and called his personal lawyer. "Marshall, it's Richard. I need you to handle something for me with utmost urgency." "Go ahead, Richard. What do you need?" "I need you to contact the best doctors in New York, specialists in—" He paused, realizing he didn't know what Helen was sick with. "Doctors from every field. I want them to see a patient named Helen Santos. She lives in the South Bronx. She's gravely ill and needs immediate treatment. I want you to cover all the costs. Absolutely everything. Private hospitals, surgeries, medications, whatever is necessary." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Richard, do you want to tell me what's going on?" "No. Just do as I ask. But there's one condition. This must be done in absolute secrecy. The patient and her family cannot know who is paying. Make up any excuse. Say it's a social program, an anonymous donation, anything. But my name cannot appear. Understood?" "Understood. I'll arrange it right away." "Good. Keep me updated on everything." Richard hung up and put his phone away. He knew this wouldn't redeem his mistakes. He knew money wouldn't erase 7 years of absence. But it was a start. It was the least he could do. He returned to the judge's room. Marcia and Frederick looked at him with concern. "Richard, are you okay?" Marcia asked. "I am," he lied. "Sorry about that episode. Earlier, it was a sudden dizzy spell. It's past. Are you sure? We can call a doctor." "No need, I'm fine." Frederick leaned forward and asked in a serious tone, "And your decision about the girl? Lucy? We approved her, but your vote counts too." Richard looked at them both and said firmly, "My vote is yes. She's through." Marcia smiled in relief. "Great. She deserves it." And so, without anyone knowing, Richard Sterling had just made the first fatherly decision of his entire life. He had approved his own daughter in a talent show without her knowing he was her father. It was ironic, tragic, and painfully moving. Meanwhile, in another room at the Javits Center, Lucy was hugging Helen with all her might. They were both crying, laughing, shaking with emotion. "I did it, Mom. I made it through." Helen stroked her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "I always knew you would, my little one. I always knew." The two stayed there, hugging for long minutes, oblivious to the movement around them, oblivious to the uncertain future that awaited them. In that moment, all that mattered was that hug, that small but significant victory. When they finally left the Javits Center, the sun was beginning to set. They took the bus back home in silence, exhausted but hopeful. Lucy looked out the window, watching the city go by, and thought about everything she still had to do to win that show. She knew the journey was just beginning, that there would be more auditions, more challenges, more moments of pressure, but she was ready. She was willing to fight to the end. Helen, beside her, closed her eyes and tried not to think about the pain pulsing through her body. She tried not to think about how weak she was, how each passing day brought her closer to the end. She just wanted to enjoy this moment. She just wanted to be there, next to her daughter, living one more day. And so, mother and daughter returned to their small room in the South Bronx, unaware that their lives were about to change in ways they could never imagine. 2 days after the audition, on an afternoon when Helen could barely get out of bed, someone knocked on the door of their small room. Lucy, who was sitting next to her mother reading a book borrowed from the community library, went to answer cautiously. On the other side, she found a man in a grey suit, very well dressed, holding a leather briefcase. "Good afternoon. Does a Ms. Helen Santos live here?" Lucy looked at the stranger with suspicion. "Who are you?" "My name is Marshall Taylor. I'm a representative of a medical foundation that offers free treatment to patients in vulnerable situations. We were informed by the social services at the public hospital about Miss Helen's case, and we would like to offer our services." Lucy frowned, not quite understanding. "Free treatment?" "That's right. Our foundation covers all. Costs, tests, hospitalization, surgery if necessary, medications. All without any charge." The girl's heart began to race. Could it be true? Was it possible that this miracle was really happening? She called her mother, who dragged herself to the door with difficulty. Helen, pale and trembling, looked at the man with distrust. "This doesn't make sense. Why would a foundation choose me, of all people?" Marshall was already prepared for this question. He smiled gently and replied, "Our foundation works with referrals from public hospitals. We choose urgent cases where we can make a difference. Your case was recommended by the medical team that treated you. If you accept our help, I can take you to St. Raphael's Hospital, one of the best in New York, today." Helen looked at Lucy, whose eyes were wide with hope. She looked back at the man. There was something about the situation that didn't seem to add up, but she was too desperate to question it. If there was a chance, however small, she had to take it. "All right, I accept." Less than an hour later, Helen was being taken in a private ambulance to St. Raphael's Hospital on the west side of Manhattan. Lucy went with her, squeezing her mother's hand the entire way. When they arrived, they were greeted by a full medical team, doctors, nurses, social workers, all treating Helen with a care and attention she had never received at the public hospital. Helen was immediately admitted to a comfortable suite with a soft bed, a television, a private bathroom, and even an armchair where Lucy could sleep to stay close to her mother. The tests began: blood work, ultrasound, CT scan, MRI. A complete battery of tests to identify exactly what was wrong and how to treat it. 3 days later, the doctors gave a definitive diagnosis and presented a treatment plan. Helen would need surgery, followed by a course of specific medications and constant monitoring. It was complex, lengthy, but there was a real chance of recovery. "You were very lucky to get this support," said the head doctor, a middle-aged man with glasses and an immaculate lab coat. "This treatment costs around $300,000, but the foundation will cover everything. Helen, lying in the hospital bed, began to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in months, she felt that maybe she would survive. Maybe she would have the chance to see Lucy grow up, to be a part of her life. Lucy, sitting by the bed, held her mother's hand and also cried. But her tears were of gratitude, of hope, of renewed faith. She didn't know how, but someone was taking care of them. Someone was helping. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, in his luxury apartment on the Upper West Side, Richard Sterling was receiving detailed medical reports on Helen's condition. He read every word with a lump in his throat. He knew he was responsible, at least in part, for her suffering. If he hadn't abandoned her pregnant, maybe she would have had better living conditions, access to preventative health care, emotional support. Maybe none of this would be happening. But there was no point in dwelling on the past. What he could do now was ensure that Helen received the best possible treatment, and that was exactly what he was doing. The days passed. Helen underwent a successful surgery and began her post-operative treatment. Gradually, color returned to her face. Her body, once frail and consumed, began to regain strength. She could sit up in bed, walk around the room, eat without feeling nauseous. It was a slow but visible transformation. Lucy visited her mother every day. In the morning, she went to the school near their room in the South Bronx. In the afternoon, she took 2 buses to the hospital and stayed there until early evening. She brought drawings she made, stories she wrote, news from the neighborhood. And of course, she brought her guitar and sang to her mother. Always the same song, always, "You Are My Sunshine." Meanwhile, the talent show was moving forward. Lucy had been approved for the next round, which would take place in 3 weeks. She needed to choose a new song to sing, practice, prepare. But how could she do that while dividing her time between school, the hospital, and the small room where she still lived? It was Helen who encouraged her. "You need to focus on the show, Lucy. I'm being well taken care of here. You don't need to worry about me all the time. Focus on your dream. Focus on winning." But Lucy couldn't. She couldn't think about the show while her mother was still sick. So she decided that even in the next round, she would sing the same song. It was the only one she knew how to play properly, the only one that came from the heart. And if the judges didn't like it, that was okay. At least she would be true to herself. The second round of the show took place in a smaller, more intimate studio. There were only 10 contestants selected from the previous round. Each would have to perform again, and only 5 would be chosen for the semi-finals. The pressure was immense. Lucy arrived at the studio accompanied by a social worker from the hospital who had offered to take her since Helen was still hospitalized. The girl wore the same clothes as always, the white blouse and patched jeans. She carried the worn-out guitar as if it were a shield. When she was called to the stage, the 3 judges were there again. Marcia smiled when she saw her. Frederick nodded respectfully. "And Richard?" Richard quickly looked away, as if he couldn't bear to look at her directly. Since the audition, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Lucy. He saw her face in the hallways at work, heard her voice. In his dreams, felt an overwhelming guilt whenever he remembered that this girl was his daughter, and she had no idea. He followed Helen's treatment from a distance, received daily updates, knew she was getting better. But he didn't have the courage to show up. Not yet. He didn't know what to say, how to introduce himself, how to ask for forgiveness for 7 years of absence. "Lucy, it's good to see you again," Marcia said warmly. "What are you going to sing for us today?" "The same song as before," Lucy answered honestly. Frederick frowned. "The same one. Why didn't you choose another?" "Because this is the only one I know how to play right, and it's the song my mum used to sing to me. It's special." There was a silence. Marcia and Frederick exchanged glances. Technically, contestants were supposed to vary their repertoire to show versatility, but there was something in Lucy's honesty that disarmed them. "All right," Marcia said, "then let's hear this song one more time." Lucy began to play, and this time it was different. This time her voice was firmer, more confident. The weeks of practice, despite all the chaos, had paid off. She didn't miss a single note. She didn't lose the tempo. Her voice, though still high and childlike, carried an emotional maturity that was impressive. As she sang, Lucy thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, recovering slowly. She thought of how Helen smiled when she came to visit. She thought of the promise she had made to win that show, and she poured all of that into the music. When she finished, there was applause, not just from the judges, but from the small production crew in the studio. Marcia stood up and clapped enthusiastically. "Lucy, that was beautiful. You've improved so much since the audition. Your voice is more secure, more controlled, and the emotion is still there, intact. My vote is yes, absolutely." Frederick also stood up. "I agree. You have something rare, kid. You have soul. My vote is also yes." All eyes turned to Richard. He was motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. It took him a few seconds before he finally lifted his head and looked at Lucy. His eyes were red, as if he were fighting back tears. "Yes," he said in a hoarse voice, "my vote is yes." Lucy was approved again. She was now among the 5 finalists who would compete in the grand finale. The news spread quickly. The show began to gain traction on social media, in the newspapers, on television. The story of the 7-year-old girl singing to save her sick mother touched the hearts of thousands of people. Lucy became a sort of symbol of struggle, of hope, of filial love. The following weeks were intense. Lucy participated in interviews, photo shoots, rehearsals, all under the careful supervision of the show's production, but the girl never lost focus. Every night, before going to sleep, she would go to the hospital to visit Helen, and there, sitting by the bed, she would play her guitar and sing softly to her mother. Helen, stronger each day, followed her daughter's journey with pride and tears in her eyes. She saw Lucy on television, heard people talking about her at the hospital, received messages from neighbors and acquaintances saying they were rooting for her. It was surreal. Her little Lucy was becoming known throughout the country. One night, as Lucy was playing the guitar, Helen interrupted her gently. "Lucy, I need to tell you something." The girl stopped, playing, and looked at her mother attentively. "You know, I've never talked much about your father, right?" Lucy nodded. It was a subject that rarely came up. Helen always said that Lucy's father wasn't around, that he had left before she was born, but never went into detail. "His name was Richard," Helen continued, her voice trembling. "Richard Sterling. He was a music producer. When I got pregnant with you, he wasn't ready to be a father. He had dreams, ambitions, a career ahead of him. And I was just a seamstress from the Bronx. I think he thought you and I would be a burden." Lucy felt a tightness in her chest. "He abandoned you?" Helen nodded, her eyes welling up. "Yes. He left a letter and left. He never came back. For a long time, I hated him. But then I understood that holding on to that hate only hurt me. I forgave him, not for him, but for me and for you. Why are you telling me this now?" Helen took her daughter's hands. "Because I don't want you to grow up with bitterness in your heart. If one day you meet your father, if he shows up in your life, I want you to know that forgiveness is possible. It doesn't mean forgetting, but it means releasing the weight." Lucy hugged her mother tightly. "I don't need a father. I just need you." But Helen knew that wasn't entirely true. She knew that deep down Lucy had always felt the absence of a father. She had always wondered what he was like, why he had abandoned her, if he would ever come back. It was a void that Helen, no matter how much she loved her daughter, couldn't fill alone. The days went by. Helen was discharged from the hospital and returned to their small room in the South Bronx. She still needed to take daily medication and have regular checkups, but she was alive, she was recovering. It was a miracle she still couldn't fully comprehend. Who was this mysterious foundation that had saved her life? Why had they chosen her? She tried to investigate, but all the information was vague. The foundation preferred to remain anonymous. There were no detailed public records. No one knew who the donors were. It was as if someone wanted to help without revealing their identity. Helen was suspicious. Her gut told her there was more to the story, but she had no proof, no certainty. So she decided to simply accept the gift life had given her and move on. Meanwhile, Richard continued his double life. By day, he was the powerful, feared, and respected businessman. By night, he was the absent father who secretly watched videos of Lucy on the show, who cried in silence, who punished himself with his own guilt. He wanted to reveal himself. He wanted to go to Helen and Lucy and tell the truth. But fear paralyzed him. Fear of being rejected. Fear of hurting them even more. Fear of not being forgiven. So he decided to wait. Wait until the show's finale. There, in front of everyone, he would gather the courage to do what he should have done 7 years ago. Take responsibility. The grand finale was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Lucy practiced every day. This time she had decided to sing not only "You Are My Sunshine," but also to add a short verse of her own at the end, something that came from her heart, something that was just hers. Helen helped her, suggesting words, encouraging her. One afternoon, while they were practicing in their room, Helen had an unexpected visitor. It was Marshall Taylor, the lawyer who had introduced himself as the Foundation's representative. He brought news. "Ms. Helen, I came to inform you that the Foundation would like to be present at the show's finale. We'd like to closely follow Lucy's journey. Since you were a beneficiary of ours, it would be a way to publicize the work we do." Helen found it strange, but she agreed. She didn't know that in reality this man was there on Richard's orders, who wanted to make sure everything was arranged for Helen to be in the audience for the finale. "We will arrange transportation, accommodation if necessary, everything so that you can be there to support your daughter." Helen thanked him, moved. Little did she know that in a few days, her life would be turned upside down in a way she could never have imagined. The final days before the grand finale were filled with pure anxiety. Lucy could barely sleep. Helen, though already recovered, felt a constant nervousness. They both knew this would be the decisive moment. Winning the show meant not only the money but also the validation of everything they had fought for. On the eve of the finale, Helen sat with Lucy on the edge of the bed and held her hands. "My little one, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know one thing. You are already a winner. Not because of the show, but because of who you are. A 7-year-old girl who faced the world to save her mother. That is more valuable than any prize." Lucy hugged her mother tightly. "I'm going to win, Mom. I'm going to win for us." And so, mother and daughter slept in each other's arms, preparing for the day that would change their lives forever. The morning of the grand finale dawned with a clear blue sky over New York. It was Saturday, and the Javits Center was unrecognizable. Thousands of people crowded the entrance, holding signs with the names of their favorite contestants. Television cameras occupied every strategic spot. Journalists interviewed passers-by. The buzz was deafening. The energy was electric. Inside one of the dressing rooms reserved for the finalists, Lucy was sitting in a chair in front of a lighted mirror, having her makeup done by a professional. The girl looked at her reflection with wide eyes, barely recognizing herself. They had styled her hair in soft curls, applied a light blush to her cheeks, and a clear gloss to her lips. She wore a simple but beautiful white dress that the show's production had provided. On her feet, new white shoes that were still a bit tight. Beside her, Helen watched everything with teary eyes. Her daughter, her little Lucy, was about to perform for millions of people. It was surreal. It felt like a dream she was afraid of waking up from. "How are you feeling, my little one?" Helen asked, stroking her daughter's hair. "Scared," Lucy admitted. "What if I forget the words? What if my voice cracks? What if I let everyone down?" Helen knelt beside the chair and held her daughter's face in her hands. "Look at me, Lucy. Look right at me. You are not going to let anyone down, because you are going to go out there and sing from your heart, just like you always have. And no matter the outcome, I will be in the audience giving you a standing ovation. You are my champion. You always have been." Lucy smiled and hugged her mother. In that embrace, she found the strength she needed. On the other side of the complex, in the backstage area reserved for the judges, Richard Sterling was alone in his room. He wore an impeccable black suit, a white shirt, and a navy blue tie. His hair was perfectly combed, his face was clean-shaven, but his eyes betrayed the internal storm he was weathering. He hadn't been able to sleep the night before. He had spent hours awake, mentally rehearsing what he would say, how he would say it, when the right moment would be. He had made a decision. Regardless of the finale's outcome, he would reveal the truth. He would publicly admit that he was Lucy's father, ask for Helen's forgiveness, and face the consequences. He couldn't keep living this lie. He couldn't keep being a coward. His cell phone rang. It was Marshall Taylor. "Richard, everything is set. Helen and Lucy are at the center. Helen will be sitting in the front row of the audience as you requested." "Good. Thank you, Marshall. Are you sure about what you're going to do today? This could have enormous repercussions. Your image, your career—" "I know, but I don't care anymore. There are things more important than a career." Richard hung up and took a deep breath. In a few hours, his entire life would change. And he was ready. The show started at 8 in the evening. The auditorium was packed. More than 5,000 people filled the stands. The lights went down, and a spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. The host, Bruno Scott, a charismatic man in his early 40s, walked out smiling and waving to the audience, which erupted in applause. "Good evening, America. Welcome to the grand finale of America's Rising Stars. Tonight you will meet the 5 finalists who have captured the hearts of millions of Americans, and one of them will walk away with the $1 million prize." The crowd screamed euphorically. Bruno continued to host the show, explaining the rules, thanking the sponsors, and then it was time to introduce the judges. "And now, let's welcome our esteemed panel of judges, Marsha Shaw, the voice that defined a generation." Marsha entered the stage to warm applause, waved to everyone, and took her seat. Frederick Lloyd, the maestro who shows no mercy. Frederick walked out, with his serious demeanor, and settled in next to Marsha. And finally, the man behind the biggest hits in American music, Richard Sterling. Richard walked onto the stage with firm steps, but his heart was racing. He gave a brief wave to the audience and sat down. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found Helen in the front row. She was there, thinner than he remembered, her face tired but her eyes shining with emotion. Upon recognizing him, Helen frowned slightly, as if something inside her had clicked. But she said nothing, she just kept looking. Richard quickly averted his gaze. It wasn't time yet. The 5 finalists were called to the stage one by one. Each would perform an original song or a special arrangement. Lucy would be the last to perform. The first contestant was John Peter, a 16-year-old with a powerful, deep voice. He sang an original song about overcoming adversity and earned enthusiastic applause. The second was Amanda, a 12-year-old with a talent for dancing and singing. She gave an energetic performance that got the crowd going. The third was Carlos, a 15-year-old who played the drums and rapped. He brought a strong social message. That moved everyone. The fourth was Beatrice, 9 years old, who sang a classical piece with a crystal-clear and impressive voice, and then it was Lucy's turn. Bruno Scott called her name, and the girl walked onto the stage to applause that seemed endless. The audience already knew her story. Everyone knew about her sick mother, her struggle on the streets, the courage of a 7-year-old child. Many were there specifically for her. Lucy walked to the center of the stage, carrying the worn-out guitar she had refused to exchange for a new one offered by the production. That guitar was part of her story, the instrument her mother had played, that she had taught herself to play. She couldn't abandon it now. The noise from the audience subsided until there was total silence. Lucy adjusted the guitar on her lap, looked to the front row where her mother was, and smiled. Helen, with tears already streaming down her face, gave her an encouraging gesture. Lucy began to play. The first chords echoed through the auditorium with a precision she had never achieved before. All the rehearsals, all the dedication, all the pain, transformed into music, was there. And then she began to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away." Her sweet, pure voice silenced the auditorium. There was nothing else but that girl and her music. The emotion was palpable. People in the audience began to cry. Cameras captured every detail, every expression, every tear. Richard, sitting at the judges' table, felt as if he were being stabbed in the chest. Every word of that song was a memory, an accusation, a plea for forgiveness. He didn't deserve. His hands were shaking, his eyes burned. He couldn't look away from Lucy. That was his daughter. That was the child he had abandoned. That was the life he had destroyed out of cowardice. Lucy continued to sing, and then, as she had promised herself, she added a verse of her own, something that came straight from her heart. And even if the whole world forgets me, even if the lights all go out, I will sing this song for you, because you are my light, my star, my everything, and I will never ever give up on you. When she finished, there was a silence of a few seconds that felt eternal, and then the auditorium erupted. People stood up, applauded, shouted, cried. It was an unceasing ovation. Even the other contestants backstage were applauding emotionally. Lucy, still at the center of the stage, looked at it all in disbelief. She had done it. She had given it her all. Bruno Scott walked onto the stage with red eyes. "Lucy, Lucy, Lucy, what you just did here is something no one will ever forget. Let's hear what our judges have to say." Marcia went first. She wiped her tears with a tissue and said in a choked voice, "Lucy, dear, I have no words. You are 7 years old, but you sing like someone who has lived 1,000 lives. Your voice carries a truth that can't be learned, that can't be taught. It's born inside of you, and you have it. My vote is yes, with all the certainty in the world." Frederick adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, "I am known for being tough, for being demanding, but today I must make an exception. Because what I saw here was not just talent. It was soul. It was purity. It was love in the form of music. You moved me, young lady, and that is very rare. My vote is also yes." All eyes turned to Richard. He was motionless, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Lucy. He took so long to speak that Bruno had to prompt him. "Richard, what is your vote?" Richard took a deep breath. His hands were still shaking. He knew it was now, that he couldn't delay any longer, that the moment had come to face the truth. He slowly rose from his chair. The audience fell silent, confused. Bruno frowned. Marcia and Frederick looked at each other, not understanding. Richard walked to the center of the stage, standing face to face with Lucy. The girl looked at him, frightened, not understanding what was happening. "Lucy," Richard began, his voice trembling, "before I give my vote, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." The auditorium was in absolute silence, not a whisper. Everyone was fixated on the scene. Richard looked at the audience, at Helen sitting in the front row. She was pale, her hands covering her mouth, as if she already knew what was coming. "7 years ago," Richard continued, his voice growing steadier, "I made the biggest mistake of my life. I loved a woman named Helen. She was special, she was real, she was everything I needed. And when she told me she was expecting a baby, I ran. I abandoned her when she was pregnant because I thought my career was more important. I thought I wasn't ready to be a father. I thought they would be better off without me." Helen began to cry uncontrollably. Some people in the audience started to whisper, trying to understand where this was going. Lucy remained still, the guitar still on her lap, her eyes wide, her heart racing. Richard turned to her and knelt on the floor, bringing himself to the girl's eye level. Tears streamed down his face without him making any effort to hide them. "Lucy, that woman was your mother, and that baby was you. I am your father, and I should never, ever have abandoned you both. I was a coward. I was a terrible man. And I don't expect you to forgive me because I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know. I needed to publicly take responsibility." The auditorium exploded with shouts, murmurs, exclamations. Cameras rushed to capture Helen's reaction, who was in a state of shock. Lucy was paralyzed. Her brain was trying to process his words. This man was her father, the father who had abandoned her, the father she had never known. You're my daddy?" she asked in a trembling voice. Richard nodded, sobbing. "Yes, my little one, I am. And I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm so sorry I didn't see you take your first steps, say your first words. I'm so sorry I let your mother suffer alone. I'm so sorry for everything." Lucy looked to the audience, searching for her mother. Helen was on her feet now, shaking, crying. Lucy dropped the guitar on the floor and ran towards her. Mother and daughter embraced in the middle of the auditorium, under the gaze of thousands of people and millions watching on television. Richard remained kneeling on the stage, his face in his hands, crying as he had never cried in his entire life. Bruno Scott, completely at a loss for what to do, approached Richard and asked in a low voice, "Richard, are you sure about what you just did? This is being broadcast live to the entire country." "I know," Richard replied, wiping his face. "And that's exactly why it had to be this way. I've hidden the truth for too long." Helen, still hugging Lucy, looked at Richard on the stage. Their eyes met for the first time in 7 years. There was pain, there was resentment, but there was also something more. There was the memory of the love they once shared. There was the understanding that despite everything, he was here, owning his mistakes. She gently let go of Lucy and said, "Go on, go talk to him." "But Mom," "Go, my child, he's your father, and everyone deserves a second chance." Lucy looked at her mother, then at Richard. Her feelings were a confusing, contradictory mix. Anger, curiosity, fear, hope, all at once. But she took a step forward, and then another, and another. She walked slowly to the stage. Richard saw her approaching and felt his heart nearly stop. Would he be rejected? Hated? He deserved to be. Lucy stopped in front of him. Richard was still kneeling, so they were face to face. The girl studied him carefully, observing every detail of his face, trying to find something of herself in this man. "Did you leave because you didn't want me?" she asked in a small voice. Richard shook his head vigorously. "No, it was never that, Lucy, never. I left because I was weak, because I was scared, because I was lost. But it was never because I didn't want you. If I could go back in time, I would do everything differently. I would stay. I would be the father you deserved. And now, do you want to be my father now?" Richard swallowed hard. "More than anything in the world, but only if you want me to. Only if you'll give me that chance. And I'll understand if you don't. I'll understand if you hate me." Lucy was silent for a long moment. The entire auditorium held its breath. And then, surprising everyone, including herself, Lucy took a step forward and hugged Richard. It was a hesitant, uncertain hug. But it was a hug. Richard wrapped his arms around her, trembling, crying, holding his daughter for the first time in 7 years. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," Lucy whispered, "but I want to try. I want to get to know you. I want to have a dad." Richard tightened the hug. "Thank you. Thank you, my little one. I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." The auditorium erupted in emotional applause. People were openly crying. Even the other contestants, forgotten backstage, were moved. This was no longer just a talent show. It was real life, raw and intense. Helen came, up on stage, and approached the two of them. Richard saw her and stood up, still holding Lucy. Helen's eyes were red, but she maintained her composure. "Helen," Richard said in a choked voice, "I don't have enough words to ask for your forgiveness for what I did to you. I destroyed your life. I abandoned you pregnant, alone, without support. And yet, you raised this incredible girl. You are a hero, and I'm just a coward trying to right my wrongs." Helen looked at him for a long moment. "You hurt me deeply, Richard. You left me when I needed you most. I spent nights crying, wondering what I had done wrong, but looking back now, I realize it might have been for the best, because I raised Lucy on my own, and she became this wonderful person who is here today, strong, brave, loving. I know, and I can never make up for the years I lost. No, you can't. But," Helen took a deep breath, "I believe in second chances. Not for you, but for her. Lucy deserves to have a father. And if you are truly willing to take on this responsibility, I will give you that chance. But make no mistake, if you hurt my daughter again, there will be no forgiveness." Richard nodded. "I understand, and I promise I won't let you down. Never again." Bruno Scott, still trying to process everything that was happening, approached the group and said, "Well, folks, this has certainly been the most emotional finale in American television history, but now we have to announce the winner." There was a silence. In that moment, the prize seemed almost insignificant compared to what had just happened. The judges quickly conferred. It didn't take long. When they returned, Marcia took the microphone and said, "The vote was unanimous. The winner of America's Rising Stars is Lucy Miller." The auditorium exploded again. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. Music played. Lucy was enveloped in hugs, shouts, congratulations. She had won. She had actually won. But for her, in that moment, the real prize wasn't the money. It was having her mother alive and recovered. It was having found her father. It was having reclaimed a family. In the months that followed, a lot changed. Richard, with Helen's support, became a part of Lucy's life. It was awkward at first, complicated, full of uncomfortable moments. But slowly they built a relationship. Richard would pick her up from school, take her for ice cream, help with her homework. He was learning to be a father, and Lucy was learning to have one. Helen and Richard did not get back together as a couple immediately. There were deep wounds that needed to heal. But they decided to give themselves a chance. They started meeting to talk, to have dinner, to simply spend time together. Trust was being rebuilt, brick by brick. With the $1 million prize, Lucy and Helen created the Sunshine Foundation, which offered free music lessons to underprivileged children. The foundation grew quickly and began serving hundreds of children in New York and other cities. Helen, fully recovered, managed the project. Richard contributed his experience in the music industry, bringing in qualified teachers and opportunities for the students. Lucy, now a minor celebrity, continued to sing, but no longer out of necessity. She sang for the love of music, for passion. She released a children's album that was a nationwide success, with the song "You Are My Sunshine" becoming an anthem of hope and resilience. The family moved into a comfortable house in a quiet New York suburb. It wasn't a mansion, but it was cozy, had a yard where Lucy could play and enough space for everyone. Helen, Richard, and Lucy lived there, slowly rebuilding what had once been broken. There were fights, there were disagreements, there were difficult moments. But there was also love. There was forgiveness. There was the understanding that families are not perfect, but they are precious. One Saturday night, almost a year after the show's finale, the three of them were gathered in the living room around the piano Richard had bought for Lucy. The girl, now 8 years old, played the keys with growing skill. Helen and Richard, sitting beside her, sang along. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are grey. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away." When they finished, the three of them hugged. Lucy looked at her parents and smiled. "I love you guys." "We love you too," Helen and Richard replied in unison. That song, which was once a desperate cry for help, had transformed into a hymn of gratitude. A reminder that love can be interrupted but never destroyed. That music has the power to heal deep wounds, that forgiveness, though difficult, is liberating, and that sometimes the greatest prize in life isn't money or fame or success. It's the chance to start over. It's the opportunity to look at those we love and say, "I made a mistake, but I'm here now, and I'm never leaving again." The story of Lucy, Helen, and Richard is proof that it's never too late to do the right thing, that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light, a ray of sunshine,